My boyfriend's friend dropped a suspicious bombshell at the bar, and when I asked my boyfriend about it, he exploded. Now I'm wondering if I'm the problem for ending things. I, 26F, have been with my now ex-boyfriend Eric, 28M, for 2 years. Overall, we've had a good relationship, nothing crazy until last night when things completely fell apart. We were out at a bar with some of his friends, just having a normal night, drinks, food, the usual. Eric and his friend Mark, 28 million, were joking around, and Eric made a comment about how much Mark was eating, something like, "Careful, Mark, you'll eat the whole damn bar." It seemed harmless at first, just typical guy humor. But then Mark looked right at me and said, "If only she knew." It was one of those moments where you instantly feel uncomfortable, like there's something going on behind your back. I had no idea what Mark was talking about, and the whole vibe at the table shifted. But before I could even react, Eric exploded. He went off on Mark, screaming at him to shut up and even tried to get physical. His other friends had to hold him back. Mark didn't really react, which only made Eric angrier. The whole thing was awkward as hell, and we ended up leaving early. When we got back to my place, I couldn't stop thinking about that comment. So I asked Eric, what the hell did Mark mean by "if only she knew"? What don't I know? And instead of just answering me like a normal person, Eric lost it again. He started yelling at me, telling me to drop it and stop being paranoid. He was dodging every question, getting more pissed every time I brought it up. I wasn't trying to pick a fight, I just wanted to know what was going on. It felt like there was something important being hidden from me, and I wasn't about to let it slide. But every time I asked, he'd just get more defensive and angry. Finally, he stormed out of my apartment. He doesn't live with me, so I locked the door and called it a night. I didn't hear from him until this morning, and when I did, it was just more angry texts telling me to drop it and leave him alone. At that point, I was done. I'm not going to sit around and be treated like I'm crazy for asking a simple question. I texted him back saying, "We're done, I need space, and if he can't be honest with me, then I don't want any part of this relationship." End of story. Now here's where it gets worse. He's been going around to our mutual friends, telling them that I left him for no reason and trying to make it seem like I'm the one who overreacted. Some of them have even reached out to me saying I should have just let it go and that I'm blowing things out of proportion. I told them to mind their own business. I don't care what they think. None of them were in that moment. None of them saw how he acted, and none of them have to live with the pit in their stomach that I've had since that weird-ass comment from Mark. I'm not about to stay in a relationship where I feel like something shady is going on behind my back. If Eric can't be straight with me after 2 years together, then what's the point? So, Reddit AITA for leaving him over this? Update 1. Alright, so, things took a turn I really didn't expect. After I posted about what happened with Eric, I was already fuming over how he handled everything, but I thought at least it'd be over once I cut him off. Turns out that was just the start of the mess. Right after I told him we were done, I started getting messages from our mutual friends. Apparently, he'd gone around telling everyone his side of the story, which, by the way, is absolutely ridiculous. He's telling people I dumped him over a joke, like I'm some humorless villain who couldn't handle a single offhand comment. That was strike one, but fine, let him talk. I know my truth, right? Anyway, fast forward a few days, I've been ignoring him and focusing on myself when, out of nowhere, Mark messages me. You remember Mark, right? The guy who made that weird comment that set this whole thing off? At first, I thought he was reaching out to apologize or maybe just try to smooth things over, but nope. His message was one line. "We need to talk. Meet me tonight. Alone." Like what? No context, no explanation, just that cryptic message. Part of me wanted to ignore him, but something about the way he worded it made me feel like I had to know what was going on. So I agreed, but I told him it was going to be in a public place. No way I was meeting him somewhere sketchy with all the weird vibes surrounding this whole situation. We ended up meeting at a coffee shop, and he was already there when I arrived, looking way more serious than I'd ever seen him. Mark's normally the goofy one, the guy who never takes anything seriously, so seeing him all tense and quiet was jarring. I didn't waste any time. I asked him straight up, "What did you mean by that comment? Why did you say, 'if only she knew'?" He hesitated like he was searching for the right words, and then he finally said, "Look, I shouldn't even be telling you this, but I think you deserve to know the truth." My heart was racing. I could feel that whatever he was about to say wasn't going to be something I wanted to hear. He started talking about how he and Eric had been friends for years, way before I ever came into the picture. Apparently, Eric had always been, let's just say, a bit shady when it came to relationships. Mark told me that during the first year of our relationship, Eric had been going through this phase where he wasn't really serious about settling down. I felt my stomach drop. I never thought Eric was the type to mess around like that, especially not while we were together, but Mark wasn't done. He went on to explain that there were overlaps with other women when Eric and I first started dating. Eric had brushed it off to his friends as keeping his options open, but Mark claimed he'd been telling Eric to cut it out once we got more serious. It was sickening to think that this could have been happening right under my nose, and I'd been completely clueless. But here's where things get even weirder. Apparently, Eric had recently been panicking, confiding in Mark that he thought everything was about to come crashing down. Mark told me he'd been pushing Eric to just be honest with me, but Eric's pride wouldn't let him admit he'd screwed up so badly. I was already feeling sick, like my whole relationship had just been this giant lie, but there was more. Mark started getting uncomfortable, looking around like he was afraid someone might overhear. He leaned in and said, "Eric's hiding something big, and it's not just about other girls." He wouldn't give me specifics, but he kept dropping hints that there was something about Eric's past he hadn't shared, something that would make a lot of things fall into place. I was so frustrated at that point. Why couldn't he just tell me what he knew instead of playing these games? I pressed him, but he said it's not my story to tell. He only told me that Eric owes me the truth and that I should make him come clean. After that, he got up, left, and didn't look back. I sat there stunned, piecing together everything he just said. I felt like my entire relationship was crumbling right before my eyes. When I got home, I tried to clear my head, but the anger just kept building. I ended up texting Eric, demanding that he tell me what the hell he'd been hiding all this time. Predictably, he dodged every single question, saying I was being dramatic and that he didn't have to explain himself to me. It was infuriating. Then, in the middle of this back and forth, he slipped up. I had asked him one last time to just come clean and tell me everything, and he replied with, "Fine, I was seeing other people in the beginning, but it's not what you think, and besides, it's not even the biggest secret I have." I couldn't believe he actually admitted it. My hands were shaking as I typed back, "Then tell me the biggest secret, Eric. Tell me everything, or I'm done for good." And all he sent back was, "You don't want to know." That was it. I told him we were officially done, blocked him, and decided I was moving on. But here's the thing. Now that I know he's hiding something huge, I can't stop obsessing over what it could be. Did he do something illegal? Was he leading a double life? My mind keeps spiraling with all these wild theories, and I can't let it go. I feel like I need closure, but every time I try to reach out to mutual friends, they just tell me to let it go, that Eric's past isn't my business anymore. I thought I was moving on, but then one of Eric's exes reached out to me on social media out of nowhere. I had no idea who this girl was, but she said she'd heard about our breakup and wanted to warn me about Eric. I didn't even know they still talked, let alone that she'd know about our breakup. She told me, "If you knew what I know, you'd be thanking your lucky stars you got out when you did." She offered to meet up and give me the whole story, but now I don't know if I should even go. Part of me thinks I'm better off just moving on, but there's another part that needs to know what the hell is going on with Eric and what I was unknowingly a part of. I'm torn, Reddit. Should I meet with her, or is it time to just drop this and finally move on? Update 2. Alright, Reddit, I didn't think things could get much messier, but I was so wrong. After that first update, a lot of you convinced me to meet with Eric's ex. I was hesitant, obviously, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed closure. My head was spinning with questions I couldn't shake off. If Eric had been hiding something major, and if it was as bad as Mark and this ex made it sound, I felt like I needed to know just what kind of person I'd been with for 2 years. So I agreed to meet her. Let's call her Sarah. We decided on a small cafe, somewhere quiet where we wouldn't be interrupted. She arrived before I did, and honestly, I was taken aback. She looked tense, like this wasn't something she was thrilled to talk about. We barely got through introductions before she jumped into it. "I'm sorry you're even in this position," she started, and I could tell this was going to be intense. Then she looked me straight in the eye and said, "You deserve to know who Eric really is." She started by telling me that they dated about 4 years ago for close to a year. In the beginning, things were good, but she quickly noticed he had some strange habits. She didn't go into detail at first, but it wasn't long before she opened up. Apparently, Eric had a pattern of lying about everything, from small stuff like where he was or what he was doing to big things that affected their relationship. She mentioned that he was incredibly secretive, always making excuses when he disappeared for hours without explanation, only to reappear with strange excuses that didn't quite add up. But that was just the start. She leaned in and lowered her voice, saying, "Eric isn't just secretive, he's actually dangerous." I felt a chill run down my spine as she continued. According to Sarah, Eric had once gotten into serious trouble for stalking someone. I know it sounds unbelievable, but she claimed it was true. Apparently, he had an axe he couldn't let go of, and he'd gone to extreme lengths to keep tabs on her, including showing up at her workplace and following her around for months. She said he somehow managed to keep it under wraps and no one pressed charges, but it left her shaken. She only found out after the fact through mutual friends who knew the girl and saw how paranoid she'd become. At this point, I could feel my stomach turning. I'd known Eric to be intense and sometimes possessive, but this was on another level. I asked her if she thought he changed, maybe gotten past whatever issues he had back then, but she just shook her head. She went on to explain how he had an obsession with control, which I guess I'd noticed, but I thought it was just his way of being particular, or maybe even protective. Hearing it from her, though, it sounded like a completely different person. It made me realize how many red flags I'd probably brushed off because I trusted him. But Sarah wasn't done. She told me something that hit way too close to home. Apparently, toward the end of their relationship, he became paranoid about her cheating, even though she wasn't. He'd accuse her of seeing other people, going through her phone and emails without her permission, and even following her once when she went out with friends. She said it got so bad she started to feel like she was losing her mind, constantly on edge, wondering what he'd accuse her of next. Eventually, she ended things, but Eric didn't take it well. For months after their breakup, he'd send her these weird, almost poetic texts about how she betrayed him and how she'd pay for leaving. She blocked him on everything, but it still took a long time for her to feel safe again. Hearing all of this left me feeling numb. Everything she described was like watching a slow-motion replay of my relationship with him. With all the little things that had unsettled me but didn't seem big enough to end things over. I felt sick, honestly. I kept thinking, how did I not see this? How could I be so blind? I asked her about the comment Mark made at the bar, the whole "if only she knew" thing. Sarah didn't seem surprised, which was telling in itself. She told me that Mark was one of the few friends who knew about Eric's issues, and she wouldn't be surprised if Mark had finally reached a point where he couldn't keep quiet about it. Sarah told me she thought Mark had always struggled with staying friends with Eric because of how shady he was, but maybe he felt some sort of loyalty. She said, honestly, Mark's probably tired of covering up for him. If he's starting to drop hints, it's because he wants you to get out. The weirdest part was that she mentioned something I hadn't thought about. Eric's family. She said they were a huge part of why he was the way he was. She said his mom was apparently very controlling, that she'd manipulate him into thinking everyone was out to get him. According to Sarah, he grew up always feeling like he needed to protect himself because his mom had drilled into him that people couldn't be trusted. She said she tried to get him to go to therapy, but he always brushed her off, claiming he didn't need it, that he could handle things on his own. I think that was the saddest part for me because it was clear that he had his own issues, maybe ones he couldn't control, but that didn't make what he did okay. After everything she told me, I was practically speechless. I didn't know what to say or how to feel. I felt relief that I'd gotten out, but also this weird sense of betrayal, like I'd never even known the real Eric. I thanked Sarah, and we went our separate ways. She told me she hoped I'd move on and be happy, that I deserved better than the mess she had to live through with him. When I got home, I felt empty. All the things I thought I'd known about Eric seemed to vanish, replaced by this twisted version of the person I'd spent 2 years with. It was like he'd been playing a part the whole time. I kept thinking back to all the moments that now seemed so off. The times he got irrationally jealous, or the times he'd lose his temper over tiny things. I felt like my entire relationship had been rewritten in front of my eyes, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd been living in some sort of nightmare without even realizing it. But here's where it gets even stranger. That night, I got a message from Mark. He'd heard I met up with Sarah, and his message was chilling. He said, "Now that you know, please be careful." Eric doesn't take rejection well. He went on to say that he'd seen Eric become unhinged after breakups before and that I should keep my guard up just in case. The fact that he even felt the need to warn me freaked me out. I'm not exactly sure what to do now, but I've started double-checking my locks and making sure I'm never out alone, especially at night. I'm still processing everything, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of who Eric really was. Part of me wonders if I should reach out to him, try to get some closure, or maybe just confront him one last time. But another part of me thinks that might be exactly what he'd want. To have me back in his life in any capacity, even if it's just to argue. At this point, I'm starting to think moving on might be my only option, as hard as it is to just walk away without the answers I still crave.